Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of The Invisible Men. My name is Ian Rowe, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and also the founder of Vertex Partnership Academy's great public charter high school in the Boogie Down Bronx.
Hello, I'm Nique Fazers, a member of the Leadership Network at AEI and an adjunct professor at Rice Business School and WashU Olin Business School.
Nique, as always, great to see you. And I'm so excited by this episode. You know, our listeners, typically we are sharing stories about incredible Black men whose accomplishments are varied and wide and not known enough, you know, and we like to give a platform. So those accomplishments are essentially invisible no more. But today, we have a combination, a father-daughter pairing, the great Bruce Bond and the great Sarah Bond. Welcome, Bruce and Sarah.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you. I quite like that. The two greats. That's the first I've heard that. Thank you for that.
And I'm not sure if he's not sure what he's referring to.
Right. Well, you two
size or what?
What's that?
I'm not sure whether the great refers to my size or what, but thank you very
much. Got it. So this episode, I think we're going to have to deal with some bantering in between father and daughter that's been forged over decades, right? So yeah, it's really great to have you both. We're excited by this conversation to talk about what it's been like. You know, Bruce, we'll call you Bruce for this conversation. Your early years, your story, the incredible accomplishments you had in the telecommunications industry and in life. And then Sarah, can't wait to talk to you about your breakthrough work in gaming and in life and what you've learned from each other, you know, and what you have to share with our audience. And so maybe we'll just get started, just roll right in. And we like to start just asking our guests, and we'll pose it to both of you. You know, part of this podcast is about race and sometimes the suppression of interesting stories, particularly of Black leaders. But we try to start early. Like, when did you know, Mr. Bond, when did you, in your early days, before you are the person you are, realize that race was a thing? Like, somehow people either perceived you differently or you perceived yourself differently based on skin color?
You know, I can't really remember that because I have always felt like I was different. My family told me I was different as early as I can remember. They never positioned me as being Black necessarily. It was always about being multiracial. In fact, my earliest ancestor was one of the 20-odd Negroes that came from Angola back in 1620, George Gowan. And he married he didn't marry because they couldn't marry, but he had children with a woman named Margaret Cornish, who was an indentured servant in Virginia, and she was born in 1610. And so we started out as people who were people of mixed race, and that always led to, if you go right down through our whole family, to a bit of an identity crisis as to who we really were and who were we? And I think a lot of people find themselves in that kind of situation. My DNA numbers say I'm about 55% Scottish and Irish. And then the rest of it comes from Angola and Africa, right? And yet I am a African American. And that's because I've got the one drop that the general society says makes you somehow part of a subclass. It's almost like an animal gene that I have, right? That makes me less than other people. But I've never thought of myself that way at all. And so, and it was actually a struggle as I grew up. I was thinking about this conversation, and I ended up growing up in a neighborhood that was really pretty bad. A lot of crime, a lot of drugs, a lot of problems. And when we first moved into that neighborhood, we were the only black family that came in there, but then you had white flight, and we ended up where almost the entire neighborhood was either Puerto Rican or was black.
Yep.
And when I was like 8 or 10 years old, my friends said I didn't think I was black.
Right. Was this in Lorain? Was this in Lorain?
In Lorain, Ohio. Yeah, in Lorain, Ohio. Yeah, I talk funny. I was loved to read books. I won the library award every year for the number of books that I read.
Nerd.
I was a nerd, but they said you're not black. You don't know who you are, and they actually tried to hang me and stone me. And these were the black kids in the neighborhood, right?
Wait a minute. So let's just dig in for that. Right. Let's just dig in for that. So you weren't black because you were evidencing signs of being smart. So you weren't comporting with their view of what it meant to be black?
Exactly right. They said I talk funny, use strange words, I look funny, right? I just didn't match the way they wanted to do things. And this is when I was younger. As I got older, I actually kind of became the leader of the people in the neighborhood as they turned to me, right? So I've always been different. My brother Jim was a psychologist, and I mentioned he was the vice president of student affairs at Bowling State University, and ended up as the president of the University of California in Sacramento. He was part of the Reagan administration. And he gave me an IQ test when I was like 4 years old and said I was extraordinarily bright. And that kind of a title has followed me throughout my whole life. When I was in the fourth grade, when they had cases where the students were supposed to take their heads down and take naps, the teachers would pull me aside and sit me in the room and have me do math problems when everybody else was resting, right? When I was in the fifth grade, my teachers would have me come up to the board and show the other students how to do long division. Let's have Bruce show us how this works, right?
Right.
In the seventh grade, I got a C on a test, and my teacher called me aside at the end of the test. She said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "There's nothing wrong with a C. C is average." She said, "There is nothing average about you.
Wow.
You're a bond. And I went to school with your brothers and your sisters, and all of you were extraordinarily bright. You don't get C's." I mean, so that was kind of my thing,
I love
right?
it.
As I came in. Then when I was a senior in high school, my assistant principal called me aside. He said, "We gave everybody in the class IQ test." He said, "I could lose my job for telling you this." He said, "But you scored over 160. It's the highest score we have ever seen in Lorain County." He said, "I'm telling you this because in your life, people will tell you because you are black, you can't do this, you can't do that, you're less than them." He says, "The chances that you will ever meet another human being who is brighter than you are is extraordinarily low."
Wow.
You'll meet people who are more experienced, right?
Yeah.
And they're more accomplished and have done more things, but don't let anyone ever tell you you are stupid.
Wow. I read an interview that you did, and you referenced, you said, because you're the youngest of five, as I understand it, and you said, "My brother and sister were the first people of color in Lorain, Ohio in the 1930s to make the National Honor Society."
That's true.
I'm curious, what did seeing that model within your own family mean for you as related to your own sense that you could achieve?
Well, I have carried what I would consider maybe the biggest burden that Sarah actually shares with me, and that's the perception that you have unlimited potential, because people have such high expectations of you. And you're always a little worried that you're not going to quite live up to that, right? Because obviously you have the same fears and insecurities that everybody else has. But people somehow look at you and think that you should be immune to that, right? And they have high expectations for you. And so I carried that kind of thing throughout my life. My brother Bud in particular was absolutely brilliant, probably the most talented of my siblings, including myself. And he had an IQ over 160, was in the Signal Corps during the Second World War. And so he actually had officer status in what was a segregated military at that time. And he always talked about how people treated him like, the white soldiers treated him like crap because he had his own driver and everything, right? But if you're fighting a war, then you get the most talented people to do it. I mean, because it's a survival thing. And so he actually played that role at that point. And he was a huge role model for me. He's the one who got me interested in electricity and technology and philosophy, and really served as kind of a surrogate father for me. He was 23 years older. He was born in 1921. And he taught me how to play table tennis. He talked to me and advised me on everything I can imagine. He was a real horse, right? But he came back from the war extremely damaged by the experiences he had had and all the death he'd seen and the friends that had been crushed. And actually, as he was dying, he said, "I'm so sorry." He said, "I should have been the leader of the family." He said, "But when I got back from the war, nothing else seemed very important at that point, right?" And so he'd had a full scholarship at Oberlin College before he got drafted into the military. But he didn't really finish college until he was in his 60s. Later on, he went back and finished. Wow. He worked in the post office for 20-some years with all that talent and capability. He scored the highest score in Lorain County on the selective service test every year, but never got to promotions, right? They always went to people who were white, right? Mm. And that's the world he lived in. And what is hard to appreciate today is that he grew up, and I did too, right at the end of it, in what was really an apartheid society. I mean, we don't think about that today. There were lynchings going on all over the place. But even when I was growing up, we couldn't go to the YMCA. They took us swimming only on Thursdays. Just the black kids could go. We couldn't go to the amusement parks. My sister Lucy, who at the time ended up being a colonel in the Army, but at the time was a captain, she came home and she was a big bowler. They wouldn't let her bowl. Mm. And she wrote a big article in the newspaper and letters to the newspaper, and she made this long thing about her not letting her bowl. And she ended it with the comment, "And all of this because I have one big freckle."
Wow.
And one big freckle. So, I mean, this idea of identity and who you were and how you fit into society was a big deal. And it caused a lot of confusion and anger, even within the black community. The whole thing about if you're brown, stick around. If you're black, step back. If you're white, you're all right. If you're yellow, you're mellow, right? And the brown bag test, right, in terms of color, was a big deal. It was very, very real. And a lot of prejudice within the black community towards other people of color, particularly those who are from the South. I was thinking about my brother Jim when they were having the race riots in Toledo. We were sitting there having dinner with him. And again, he was the vice president of student affairs at Bowling Green State University. And they'd had the sit-ins there. And he was so upset because they had closed down the university and having all these problems. And he was there as the vice president of student affairs. And they didn't say anything to him. He said, right at the end of it, the black student representative said to him, "Dr. Bond, I have one question for you. Is you is or is you ain't?" And he said to me, "What the hell does that mean?" "What does that mean?" He says, "I just don't understand." He says, he says, "I used to be colored, and then I was Negro, and then I was black, and now I'm an African American, even though I've never been to Africa." He says, I'm just a man, an American that happens to have swarthy skin. And there's nothing different about me than any of these. Why are they treat me so different? I said, you know what, Jim? You're absolutely right about that. The whole concept about race is really a cultural construct. It's not real. Yeah. But I'll tell you what, they're having the riots on Dorr Street right now. Why don't you get in your car and drive down there? I'm not going with you. You drive down there and you get out of your car. And if the police say, "Sir, you shouldn't be down here. This is really dangerous," you'll know one thing. If they say, "Get your ass up against the wall and listen to the position," you'll know something else, right? So, I mean, no matter what you think, Jim, what the society as a whole, the political economy you live in, can have a real impact on your life, can cost you your life.
Yes.
And that's real.
And that's real.
And so, you don't have to internalize this idea that somehow you're inferior and you're really different. But you need to recognize that the external world, the world you live in, sees you a certain way. And that has real impacts. Some of which, quite frankly, in today's world are quite positive. You can play on that, right?
Yep.
But do not internalize it and believe that somehow you're inferior or that somehow you're superior. You're a mixture of a lot of different kinds of people who have made you a unique individual. And don't ever buy anything else.
Bruce, before we move to Sarah, because I want to hear Sarah's a similar story in her journey, but I have to ask one question, Bruce. In terms of how you went from being someone that was bullied and mistreated by the neighborhood kids, and that evolved into you being kind of the leader of them. How did that transformation happen?
Well, for one thing, I was bigger than all
that was a
that.
devious
I'm
laugh.
amazed you haven't already figured it out.
I was bigger, and I was at least as talented as they were, and I knew how to play the game. Right. In fact, it was terrible. My good friends, the McGee brothers, they used to stop by my house. They all used to go into town and shoplift all the time. They stopped by and said, "You want anything? We're going shopping. Want us to bring you anything?"
We're going shopping. Yeah.
I mean, but I never got involved in that. I just didn't. Right? We had one situation where we lived right next to a railroad tracks, and they always had all these cars, the railroad cars that were parked there. And we broke into one of the cabooses, and we got the flares out of it. But there was also a box of dynamite in there. So we took that too. And we were, well, I know, we were just kids. We were
You
like,
never know when you're going to need a stick of dynamite.
Well, we didn't even really know what it was. We got the flares, and we were only like 10 or 12 years old, and we buried the dynamite and we played with the flares. Well, about 6 weeks later, I come home and my mom is really upset with me, and I said, "What's wrong?" And there was this guy sitting there. White guy sitting there in a suit and tie. And she said, "He's telling me some things about you that I think aren't true. And I want you to tell him he is wrong." And he said, "I'm from the alcohol, firearms, tobacco and firearms, or the part of the government." He said, "And we research any guns or explosives that are stolen." He said, "Before you say anything, I have to tell you, we've already arrested 2 of your friends. And they've told us all about the dynamite." And so all of us ended up getting arrested and going to court for the whole thing, right?
Oh my gosh.
And my mom was the only one that showed up. The other kids' parents didn't show up. And so they released me on my mom's reconnaissance. The rest of them all went to jail.
Oh, wow.
All my friends went to jail, but I didn't. And so my mom said, "Okay, enough of this." And she sent me, all summer long, I went to the Jewish day camp. They picked me up in the morning and get on the bus. I was gone the whole time. So I had no interaction with my friends at all. Interestingly enough, later on, when I went to high school, the high school I was in included a lot of the kids I'd met at the Jewish day camp. And we were friends. And so I went over to their houses. I spent nights there. I had dinner with them. I sat and listened to them talk about how they ran their families. We need to help this. We need to pull together here, help this person get a job, help them with their careers. They were very influential in kind of explaining a different way the world worked, right?
Yeah.
Right? I went sailing on their boats when no black people did that, right? Right? I was just different. I've always been different.
Yep.
And that was an enormous gift that I was given, right?
Well,
But you talk about things that just happened. I told Sarah recently, I went to AT&T and they put me in charge of developing the new digital PBX system. And I decided I needed to get more information on technology. So I signed up to take a class in Chicago on how to build central office equipment. So I was in that meeting, and I had to fly the next morning to Los Angeles. And so I got on this flight to fly to Los Angeles, and I'm in first class. Everybody's in first class. We're all buckled in, reading books. And the stewardess comes on, and she says, there's a young lady here whose father is dying in Los Angeles. And she wants to get to see her father before he dies. Will one of you give up your seat? And we're all buckled in and reading our books and stuff. In fact, I was reading a computer gaming magazine, so I was busy. And nobody moved. And so she leaves. She comes back a couple minutes later, and she brings the woman with her. And the woman is hysterical. Please, I've got to see my dad. Please, help me. I got to get to L.A. The stewardess says, I'll tell you what, anyone who gives up their seat will give you a first-class ticket to any place in the country for free, right? There's another flight leaving for Chicago in an hour, and you can take that. Nobody moves. There's 20 people sitting there. Nobody moves. And I finally thought, what the heck? What am I going to do? I'm going to get to Los Angeles, and I'll check in the hotel, get room service, get ready for my meeting tomorrow. So I gave her my seat. I'm sitting in the lounge drinking a Coca-Cola, and the plane's taking off. It blows up in midair, kills everybody on the plane. 270 people are dead.
Whoa, Sarah, did you know this?
Yes.
Yeah. There were 20 people sitting in first class. Only one person. There's only one seat to give up. Only one person out of 20 said, I'll help this young lady out. It's not that big a deal. The rest of them didn't move. All dead. And so you were talking about things that happened. There would be no Sarah, right? There'd be no Sarah. None of my children would be here. None of these things would have happened. And that's just life, man.
Yeah. Wow. Yes.
But that'll cause you to re-index some things about how you think about things.
That will cause you to re-index some things. That'll be the line from this discussion.
That's a level set.
Wow.
But you ask yourself,
can you repeat the introductory kind of statement for Sarah so that she can?
Yes, no, absolutely, and I.
That was an incredible introduction.
Thank you.
Remarkable.
Yeah, and I just have to say on this point of race being a social construct. My parents grew up in Jamaica, and my dad often said, when in Jamaica he was a man. He was respected. It wasn't until he came to the United States where he learned he was a black man, and that had meaning. And he always taught us never to, use that as some reason to think that we had, lesser capacity. But Sarah, I do want to bring you in because I'm sure you've heard many of these stories from your dad before, and we're so curious to hear what you learned from him. But you unto yourself are incredible, and would love to pose to you the same question about, before you were the Sarah Bond of Xbox and Harvard and all the things that you've done in your life, when did you know that race was a thing? Like, when did you first realize, gosh, and I know you spent time in London as well growing up, but when did you realize my skin color actually has some either positive or negative value?
Well, first, I love my daddy so much. So it's really, it's just fun to get other people to get to see what I see. So thank you for that.
Yeah. We love your dad too.
Yeah. So if I reflect on it, so a lot of the principles that my dad shared with you around how he was raised was how I was raised. So the first time it occurred to me that if I go back, it didn't happen in my family. It happened in school. And it was second grade. And I came in the morning and the teacher had written 4 numbers on the board. And she said, guess what these numbers are? And they were the life expectancies of a black man, black woman, white man, white woman. And she then revealed this. And she said it was because she was talking about probabilities.
Oh my gosh.
And everyone in the class starts whispering, oh my gosh, why is Sarah going to die earlier? Because I was the only African American in the class. And I mean, I'm like 8. I go on overload, I'm crying because everyone in the class is trying to figure out why I'm going to die. And the teachers come over, they apologize, and they say, "Oh no, dear, we don't mean you. I mean, because you're like, you eat good food and you take good care of yourself. It's the other Black people."
Yeah, you're
Right.
you're different.
That's
And it's
that's the
the same
equivalent.
thing.
Right. That's the equivalent of your dad's friend saying you're not Black many years earlier.
Yeah. And so I say, in true 8-year-old fashion, that I'm going to live to be 1,000,000,000 years old. So, now, one other thing, though, that happened that was very instrumental for me is there's no question growing up that when you're in an environment, when you suddenly realize this and you pick up all of these cues that you don't know are cues. The analogy I give is you can't see your nose because it's always there. So my experience of the world is my only experience of the world. It never occurred to me I was being treated different. It was just all I knew.
Right.
And I thought, and so then what happened was when I was 10, we moved to England and I go to boarding school in England. So I move out of the American societal context into the English societal context. In all countries have groups of people who are seen as higher or lower in social structures.
Yep.
But England's is different than America's. And in England, I was mixed, not Black, because I am not 100% African. And because I was at an upper middle class school and I developed an upper middle class accent, I had a completely different reception from people than I did in the United States. And I would come back and forth for vacation and I could feel it.
Wow.
So I would say that's when I knew. And what it taught me, though, was this beautiful lesson. I was like, oh, this is not me. I am not lesser. This is a societal construct. I need not have the societal construct dictate my self-worth. That is their issue, not my issue, which is the most powerful thing I was ever given. And that is what made it a strength. Because once I realized that, anytime I pick up that something's happening because of that, I'm like, this is brilliant. We are now what I call an asymmetric information situation. I know more about this person than they know about me. And when I know more about someone than they know about me, I will win.
You have the advantage. Wow.
Absolutely.
I love it. I mean,
I'm not that smart. It's hilarious.
Yeah. I love it. And you clearly have brought that into your professional life. Again, I read an interview with you, and I love this quote because you're known for being fearless, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I encounter something hard, I remind myself there is nothing that can be done to me that has not been done to my ancestors. I've only achieved what I've achieved because of all of the people who came before me.
Yeah, and sometimes I add one more line.
Yes.
And they made me, so I can do anything I put my mind to. I am them.
Wow. And they made
right?
you. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
And this is it actually came up when I moved into when I joined the Xbox team. A lot of people talked to me about some of the things in the gaming industry and how I had to be thoughtful about some of the things around how diverse it was and how many women were in leadership and how the community reacts to things. And Phil, who I work for now, just said, hey, I just want you to be prepared for this. I want you to feel supported through this. And it happened to be that my father's sister, my Aunt Lucy, who was a colonel in the Army, had died the day before. And I was sitting in his office and I said, hey, I just got to stop you right there. My aunt was a colonel in the Army in the era of segregation. That was hard.
That's hard. Right.
That's called hard.
Wow. And so, right. So,
and he said, okay, you got the job. Yeah. Yeah.
I love it. I mean, Nique, I don't know if you wanted to follow up on that. I've many places I'd like to go with that. But go ahead. What did you want to pose?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh no, I was going to let you flow. At some point, I just wanted to provide our readers. So I spent, a dozen plus years in the video game industry, and the role that Sarah has is a critically important senior leadership role in the industry. And the gaming industry is a white male dominated industry that is kind of filled with teenage mindsets. And so what Sarah has accomplished is not to be misunderstood. It takes that degree of, first of all, intellectual strength, but also the mental fitness that she has as she references her aunt to do what she does. I just want our audience to understand that the gaming industry is a tough industry. And it's two cheers and a celebration to Sarah.
Thank you
for reaching the place that she has and delivering the value that she does on a daily basis.
One thing I'd like to add to this, because I feel that it touches on what both my dad and I are speaking about, is what if I reflect and I say, what is special to me about being born in this body is it has given me what I see as more perspective. Because I am forced, because some people see me really far this way or really far this way, to operate with a large field of view. Mm. And when I operate with a larger field of view, I can see better and I can make better judgment calls. And so things that, could be a panic or could seem really hard or impossible or discouraging, I just pull back and I'm like, wait, let's ground myself in the true arc of time, in where I come from and where people are going. And then you say, this is fine. This is fine. Right. This is not to be panicked about, people. This can be solved. And it's so grounding. And it gives me more confidence, not less.
One of the things I try to do as a leader whenever I confront challenging situations is to think, and I'm confronting a challenging, decision, what's the worst thing that can happen? Or it's catastrophic, but the question is, can you deal with it? Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, people don't appreciate how much life is really a journey. It's not a place. It's not a place. And there's a continuity to it, and there will be a tomorrow, and you move on. And you see things as disaster. And some of the things I talked to you about, you think, geez, that's horrible. But it's all part of what came to make me who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my godmother, who my father knew, she passed away several years ago during COVID. She used to say, becoming is greater than being.
It is.
I always thought very beautiful. And it is. I was thinking of her at one point, and I thought, actually, the truth is there is no being. There is only becoming.
That is becoming.
It. Wow.
That's right.
We may have to keep that in mind when we talk about advice to Daryl. I love that. There is no being. We're always on a journey. We're always
moving. Always moving.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. So Bruce, you, your career, talking about, becoming, part of the way I think all of us have to deal with these issues is to have a vision of our lives or our professional pursuits. And Bruce, you were part of the early formation of the internet before anyone even knew what this phenomena could be. Can you talk a little bit about those early days when you were in telecom and you were, I think you said there are many fathers of the internet, and that you were happy to be one of them.
Well, it's going to sound odd, but as I mentioned, I was only like 30 years old, and they sent me I had a brand new MBA from the University of Dayton at that time, and they sent me to AT&T to manage the development of the first digital PBX system. And I met with the people in Homedale, and I had like 50 people in the room, and they were all PhDs in electrical engineering and computer scientists, and some from the finest universities in the world, and very experienced. And here's this 30-year-old kid who's supposed to be running this project, right? Mm. And that led me to go on to work on a master's in computer science, but that's because I wasn't going to let these guys blow smoke at me like that. But they took me down the hall after the meeting and said, I want you to meet a couple guys. And they introduced me to Thomas and Richie, who said they were working on a new software project, a new operating system. And they didn't know what to call it. And they had a bunch of names that were written on chalk. There were no whiteboards in chalk. And the one in the middle they had circled was Unix.
Right.
And they said, we'll call it Unix because it's universal. It treats everything on a peer-to-peer basis, both the databases and all the system and processors, everything it treats the same. And so we had to develop a new computer language for it to work. And so we developed a new language, and not a very sexy name. There was an A version and a B version, but we're currently working on a version we call C, the C programming language.
Yeah.
And I said, geez,
Cornell.
I said, I know how to do a little bit of programming. I said, well, can I learn the language? They said, well, what do you do? Can you do Fortran and COBOL? And I said, yeah. They said, well, it's a structured language just like that. And so they gave me a logon for the system. It was on a PDP-8, DEC PDP-8 machine. Yeah. And I had a TI-1000 with an acoustic coupled on it. And so I used to dial in every night from Denver and kind of play around with this language. And I was playing around with it. At the same time, I was playing computer games on some of these early platforms. And I realized that the processor that they were using in that particular machine was the same processor we were planning on using in our new PBX system. It's the same darn thing. And so I was talking to the Bell Labs guys, and I said, well, it's the same processor. What's the difference? And they said, well, it just ours has a few more memory modules on it, right? But it's the same machine. I said, well, if it can do telecommunications, why can't it do word processing? Since people use it to do computer games. And they said, that's right. You're right. And I said, well, since we've got this new Unix programming language, could we hook it up to an external server and have that provide more storage and more information? And they said, yeah, we could do that. Have an adjunct processor. I said, well, does it have to be in the same room, or could it actually be located one in Denver, just like as I dial in? And they said, network them together. And I said, yeah, why couldn't we do that? And so the Unix operating system, UUCP, Unix to Unix Communications Protocol, is the basis of TCP/IP. For internet. That's what it is, basically. And so the whole thing was based on the Unix architecture. And I actually started a lot of that thinking down that road. And then when I went to, I took some of that thinking to British Telecom, and the people who were working on the first user interface for that would turn out to be Netscape. Right. They came over to London and to talk to me about it, and this new idea they had about making it more friendly so people didn't have to communicate with the Unix computer language, right? You could actually have an interface where you could use natural language to do it. And they were thinking about that and how that could be used. And I said, well, hey, we could kind of tie all this together. And we did some of the first implementations of that when I was at BT. And of course, later I left BT and became the CEO of ANS, Advanced Network Communication, which built the National Science Foundation Network, working for Steve Case at AOL. So I was kind of involved in that whole development, right? Which was I just happened to be present at that time. Of course, I also was part of the advanced mobile phone service development, which became cellular radio, right? And was involved in some of the early work on AI with the joint work I put together between Nippon Tel, the BT laboratories, and the Media Lab at MIT. So I just actually had my fingers on a lot of these early development pieces, of which the internet was a big piece of that. One of my major failures is I'm part of the management group at AOL, And this guy named Jeff Bezos comes over and meets with us and says he has this idea about selling books over the internet. And he says, it's very similar to what you do at AOL. We won't actually own any books. We'll be kind of a group that kind of pulls it all together so people get access to it. And I said, come on, Jeff. I mean, you're never going to find anyone who is a deep believer in the internet and networking, but you are never going to sell books over the internet. It's just not going to work. I mean, people walk into a bookstore and they think they're looking for one thing. They walk out with all kinds of magazines and other books, and so they like to browse. It'll never work. And he said, well, maybe you're right. He said, but would any of you be interested? If you don't want to buy the company, buy my idea, would any of you be interested in some of the stock before I do the IPO? Now, come on, Jeff. Good luck to you, man. I hope it works out for you. I'm just saying, I'm really not all that bright.
I have to say, that's the first time I've heard that one.
That'll never work, Jeff. That is a dumb idea. It really is.
So Bruce, I this is a question that never leaves my mind. There are lots of, and we'll use men in this case, there's lots of incredibly talented, exceptional men. And so few of them have truly exceptional children. Help our listeners understand what actions you took to make sure that your children were truly exceptional and that they weren't an afterthought. They weren't just a side hobby for you and your wife.
Well, actually, I hope they put on my gravestone that I was a good father to my children. That is my greatest accomplishment by far. Sarah won't tell you this, but when Sarah was born, I walked out of the delivery room to call my mom, and there were a group of nurses coming down the hall. And they said, is this the room? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, the doctor called me and said that they've had a wonder baby. And this was the Morristown General Hospital, which is a regional hospital. So we deliver thousands of babies. And maybe once every 10 years or so, we get one that is really, really special. We call them a wonder baby. And I said, well, what makes them a wonder baby? They said, I don't know. I said, you can just tell. The coloring, the alertness, there's something. And the doctor called and said that we found one. And it's almost like the three kings, here they were coming to the room to see the wonder baby.
Oh my God.
And so that I talked about the burden that I carried. That's the one Sarah carries. She's a wonder baby. She's one of a very small number of people that God chose to put on this earth, and her job is to make a difference. Make a difference for humanity. That's the burden you carry. And so, so I've always felt with Sarah in particular that I had a responsibility to try and help her to achieve what she could achieve. So the best education, invested money, invested time. Mm-hmm. She and I spent hours and hours doing matrix algebra, turning matrices, right? In fact, I was thinking the other day, she told me once that she said, I learned a lot in school. She said, but actually, I think most of my education has come from you. I mean, I read to her every night, and I constantly have told her how special she was and our expectations for her. There's a really Pygmalion factor here where you kind of get what you expect, right? I have two other daughters who are also very outstanding. And the youngest one just graduated with a PhD in structural biology from the University of California, right? And they've said she's got the genius shine at 28 years old. And her professors say she has a chance to make a difference for humanity. And that is just really special, right? One of the greatest compliment I personally ever got is when I was given my honorary doctorate. They said it was for my contributions to humanity. Mm. And that is the greatest compliment one human being can give to another, is that you made a difference. We're glad you lived. And so I've invested literally millions of dollars into my kids. And people have said, you're crazy to do that. You're stupid. Why are you doing that? right? It's because they are me. They're the extension. They're my gift to the world. And I've always felt that way.
I have some color to add to that, because you could put a dollar number on it, but I think it's infinite what you've invested. But importantly, what my father taught me was that you earn everything. There's some people who invest in their kids by giving them a cushion, making it easy, and telling you they don't have to worry. I got the opposite. And there were times where that made me super mad. But I am not angry now.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the end, what my father and my parents did is they made me someone who can persist and exist in almost any circumstance.
Wow.
And some of the time, right? Some of the times are like, you have to go figure this out, Sarah. We could fix it for you, but we're not going to fix it for you. That's the easy thing to do. As parents, you have to go figure it out. And I had friends who were in different situations, and I remember at the time feeling envious of that. And now I'm not at all, because look at the world, look at how much change we have to navigate, look how many things you get thrown at you. And I go back, I'm like, well, I have these tools that I was taught from the very get-go, and that's priceless.
And do you see yourself doing that now with your own children?
Yes, absolutely. Talk to them about it all the time.
I also think there is, I'm really into my animals. I raise my dogs and my cats, and I have had generations and generations of them. And you see personality traits that go from one to the other. And so there's a little bit of an innate thing here. You see lots of people, as Sarah says, kids who get raised and they have all the opportunities and they end up being drug addicts and having all kinds of problems, right? You can take the whole thing, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Mm-hmm. But why does Sarah have the achievement gene? Whereas some people would sit back and just enjoy being the privileged individual and not work that hard. And Sarah has, from day one, just worked her tail off. She put enormous energy. When you combine genius with energy, you've got a real monster. But you can't, but she really has worked extraordinarily hard for everything. And we're not going to get into all the travails that she's had along the way, but she's had a lot of pain and a lot of obstacles to overcome. It hasn't all been sunshine and flowers at all.
Of course.
But she's able to compartmentalize, and she always does the job. He talked about coming from the UK to the United States, and she probably won't take you through her whole experience, her first college experience here, with all the racisms and the problems that she had to face, right? But that didn't stop her from having a near 4.0 performance at a top Ivy League school. In spite of all the personal issues, she's taking care of business. And that's Sarah. She takes care of business.
You just used a really powerful word, compartmentalize. Right, where I take that, Sarah, to mean that you faced a challenge, but you were able to sort of contain that, like in its box.
Does that well.
But didn't slow you down.
Yeah, I think there's something my dad and I talk a lot about, which is it's not what happens to you that defines you, it's how you choose to react to it.
Viktor Frankl.
Yeah, we talk about that all the time. Or, if you can meet triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters both the same, from the poem If.
Yeah, of course. Our students are learning it right now, in fact.
It's such a powerful thing. Remember, triumph is one of the things that you should not react to either. That's what I think is so important there.
Those two imposters.
They are imposters. So to me, it's about that. Sometimes compartmentalization means that you treat that something doesn't exist or you suppress it. For me, it's more like how I organize it. Like the negative or the difficult things exist. The question is, what is its role in who you are? And all things, I think, if you frame them, are sources of energy. You can just choose to reframe them, like how you choose to interpret them in your story. And I think that that's part of what it is. So I'll give an example. I remember this. This would have been 7 years ago. My husband likes to play NPR in the morning. So I'm brushing my teeth. The radio's on. It's sometime in June, and they announce, they're like, "This is the day of the year that African American women have earned as much as white men did in the previous year," and it's like 6 months into the next year. And I remember feeling like that feeling of rage go through me about how horrible that was, and then it just like hit me in my head. I was like, or I could interpret it that if I'm sitting next to someone who is a white man, that I am mathematically that much better than them. It's like the same math.
Right.
So,
Right.
so I'm going to use that as fuel. The next time I'm doubting myself, I'm going to remind myself that it is a mathematical truth that I had to work this much harder to get to the same spot. So I should feel real confidence in this room. I am a leader in this room. So that's not me compartmentalizing it at all. I just organized it correctly.
I stayed with Sarah for a while when I was building my house here in Ohio, and I was walking down the street in her neighborhood, and one of her neighbors, who is a white male who used to run the park service for Seattle, and he says to me, he says, "How much of your accomplishments and Sarah's accomplishments are simply because you're black?" And I said, that's an interesting question. I said, 100% of them. He said, "What?" I said, "Sure." I said, because
they're her accomplishments, and she's black, so I guess.
because we always had to work twice as hard as you did to accomplish anything. It's made us much better than you are.
Yeah, it's just math. It's just math.
And now that things have evened out a bit, you can't keep up. It's really 100%. You forced us to really work really, really hard to get to where we're at. I always used to tell Sarah that one of my favorite quotes is from Apocalypse Now, where he says, "Have you ever stopped to consider the only true freedom is freedom from the opinions of others?" Then he waits 2 beats and he says, "Freedom from the opinions of yourself," because you limit yourself based on the affirmation that you get from other people. They tell you whether you're smart, whether you're ugly, whether you're pretty, and you internalize that, and that limits what you can do. The extent to which you don't let that happen to you is true freedom.
Yeah. This picks up on a thing related for me, where when my daughter was like 2 or 3 years old, and I learned a lot from my kids, I'm talking to her on the front porch about something. And I think I'm trying to explain like something different between men and women.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, yeah, like that's because daddy's a man and mommy's a woman. And she goes, "Mommy, you're not a woman. Women are white."
Whoa. And
I had like the most, this feeling of just horror goes through me. Oh my gosh, what prevailing messages is she getting in the world where she's associated the definition of female with race so heavily? And she's 3 or 2, very young, right? So I say, "Oh no, women can be every color of the rainbow, da, 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 da." But it left me thinking about what are the ambient messages that are being sent to us that we internalize subconsciously. And then I realized that I needed to be very, very careful about what external messages I determined to internalize. And that because if I was open to everything, I would allow myself to be warped by these things. Sure. And it would crush me. So then I decided I was going to create a standard for myself by which I judged if I thought I did well. And that I would anchor in that standard as an evergreen standard, because excellence was important, but I needed to be very careful about it. And I created this set of 3 things that I asked myself at the end of every day as to whether or not I had a good day. And they are, did I bring my A game? Like, did I give it everything I have? The second was I inclusive of others? Did I create opportunity for other people besides me to succeed? And the third is if everyone associated with me was judged based off of what I did today, my team, my family, my friends, did I make them proud?
That's powerful.
And I just decided, I'm like, it doesn't matter if it worked out or not, or what the results were on a day-to-day basis. I'm going to do this every day. And over a long arc of time, value will be created if I just do that. It's been about 7 years.
It's been about 7 years.
And we should skip a couple of our normal segments because I want the purity of this episode to be fully intact. I recommend we move to the final segment where we give advice to Daryl.
Well, I mean, what you just said, Sarah, like as a frame for how each of us should think about the value we bring to ourselves, to our families, to our workplace. It's amazing, and we do have a final question. And before we get there, I just want to ask you both, given everything you've just said about the messages, even your daughter, are you optimistic about where we are as a country around issues of race, around issues of identity? I presume we can take some progress, Bruce, from the stories you shared when you were much younger to the achievements that we're making some kind of progress. But are you still optimistic for your own grandchildren, Bruce?
I am probably one of the few people you're going to meet who knew Martin Luther King. I spent almost an hour with him back in 1967, 68 when Carl Stokes was running for mayor of Cleveland, and I was running a community center in Lorain, Ohio, just outside of Lorain, and I walked him through the neighborhood and talked to him. I also met Rosa Parks. Also met and talked to Nelson Mandela. Okay, so I think that's kind of unique. There are probably some other people that can say that, but not very many. And what is clear to me is, again, this is a journey. Yeah. We're moving forward. And I liked Trump's comment about Martin Luther King's word that his dream was that people wouldn't be judged by the color of their skin, that they'd be judged by the level of their character, of who they were. Right. And so I've always kind of liked that. And so all this identity politics stuff, I understand at one level, there was power in people who are oppressed or marginalized coming together as a group. It's almost like a unionization kind of a thing. And there is power in being able to do things as a block, right? Even if the block really is made up of all kinds of people that are very, very different kinds of people. But I really hope we do move to a place where this identity politics thing is not an issue, where people are individuals, can be judged on their merit and their character. And I think in the long run, that's where we're going to end up. And when I think about where I came from, I talked about some of that. I didn't talk about when I was in college and I was the president of the CSU group for the Students for Nonviolent Action, how people would call me every night at 3 o'clock in the morning and say to the Ku Klux Klan, "We're going to kill you, Bruce Bond." I didn't talk about walking to my dorm one night and having a bunch of guys shooting at me with shotguns and blowing the windows out, right? But that happened, right? That happened to me, right? And so we're not there right now, really, for most of us. We are not, right? The police violence thing is upsetting, no question about it. But it's not the same thing that happened in Detroit when they went into the Black Panthers things and killed them all at 3 o'clock in the morning and shot them all, right? That's another time. And I don't think we're going to go back there. And so I'm extremely optimistic. Now, do I think it's going to happen tomorrow afternoon? No. Would Sarah be where Sarah is today if this was 1967? No. Right? My brother Bud couldn't get out of the post office sorting mail, and he was brilliant, wonderful individual. And today that wouldn't be true. There is no question that we're moving forward. Is it fast enough for everybody? No. Is things perfect? No. But I'm extremely optimistic as to where the country's going and the things that are going to happen.
Yeah.
I think Western democracy is in retreat all over the world right now. And that's not just here. There are issues on a global basis in terms of what's happening in terms of liberal democracy. No question about that. But again, it's not a place. It's a journey.
Yep. Yep.
We'll continue to move forward, and there'll be another day, and then there'll be another day, and there'll be another day.
Yeah.
And I think as King said, the arc is long. It's long, right? And so being disappointed about the speed or the direction this afternoon is, I think it'll be wonderful. I think my grandkids, the potential they have to do things is unimaginable.
Mm-hmm.
When I was 12 years old, I grew up like a quarter of a mile from Lake Erie. And I used to get up at night when my mom and dad were asleep, only 12, and I would walk that quarter mile to the lake and go out they had a stone pier that went out way into the lake. And I'd go out on that pier, and I would, really dangerous because they were big rocks, but had these big spots. I could break my leg if I stepped in between them wrong, right? But I would lay down on that rock and look up at the sky and ask God. I'd say, what do you have in prayer? What's going to happen to me? What are the possibilities? And I could not imagine. I had no concept. I couldn't spell Cambridge, that I was going to go to MIT and finish first in my class. I didn't know there was a Cambridge in England, and meeting the Queen of England and Prince Charles and all these people that I've had an opportunity to interact with, and what a wonderful life. And that was unimaginable. And I think the lives that my grandchildren look at is unimaginable.
Yeah. Wow. So
they have no idea what will come.
Before we get to the final, Sarah, are you optimistic about where we are and the progress? As your dad said, the arc is long, but it bends towards justice.
I look at it very similarly. It's back to what I said, the field of view. It's super easy to ask yourself, does yesterday feel better than today? Or am I happy about this point in time? And to get all wrapped around the axle about that. And then I'll be like, wait a second. Hold up. My grandfather was born in 1899. Right? Like, how long does it take people to change their thoughts and views? If you think about it in generations, some of the stuff, like slavery, was yesterday. Mm-hmm. In generational memory. Mm-hmm. So I can get frustrated about things that don't feel right now. But what I'm really getting frustrated with is not if things are getting better. I'm getting frustrated about my birth year, where I got landed in the arc. And then I started to think about that, and I was like, no, if I could pick any moment, I want to be here now. I want to be here in this right now. This is really important work for society. Sure. So I often repeat myself.
My grandfather was born in 1862.
Exactly.
And I knew him.
It's just,
he died in 1954. And so can you imagine how different that world is?
Yeah. I sometimes repeat this phrase, my brain, this body, this time. Right? This is where I want to be.
Yep.
Right? That the change that we feel, that the tension in the system, the debate, that this is constructive. We're actually discussing this. This is a topic. Before it wasn't a topic. So to me, I'm like, oh, you thought it would just be like we, flipped a switch and everybody knew the answer to this very difficult, multifaceted societal issue that no, of course not. So I have optimism because I'm like, this is on the agenda. This is something we're focused on. We're wrestling with. We make progress in some ways. We mess up in other ways. We fix things in other ways. We learn again.
Yep.
And then when you pan back, I'm like, do I believe the world that my children will walk into is when they walk into the workforce, is it going to be totally different than the world I walked into? Yes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. And we have agency. We have agency.
And we have agency. I will leave you with this little story. At the height of the pandemic, when, people were really talking about Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, and I'm sitting at the dinner table. My son's super little. He's like 6 or 7. And he goes, Mommy, all of this talk of black and white. He goes, but we're both. And that's great, right? And I said, it is great. Because it's just about people, right? I said, it is just about people. You get to walk out in the world with that point of view, and that's what people need. Not divisions, bridges and progress.
Yep.
And I've just always been inspired by like the purity of his observation.
I love it. Well, let me just say, so Nique and I, we started the Invisible Men, 30 years ago when we were at Harvard Business School, and during the Rodney King riots, and Nique had the great idea that we felt invisible at that time because the narrative was that if you're a black man, you are an endangered species. You're going to be shot while walking, shot while driving. You're just going to be shot. You live under the thumb of this oppressive society. And here we were as black men at Harvard Business School, and there were other black men at the other various Harvard graduate schools, and Nique had the great idea to create a documentary featuring these black men from these different graduate schools. And we called it The Invisible Men, to share these stories. And we created this character, Daryl, 16-year-old black kid, imaginary black kid, lives in forgotten USA, an imaginary urban city, because we felt Daryl was hearing this larger narrative of black male oppression and never hearing our stories, never even getting an opportunity to know that there's an alternative path. And so Sarah, will start with you, and then Bruce will end with you. What advice would you give to a modern day Daryl who's 16, who's heard a lot of the narrative? What would you share with him about how he should think about his life?
Well, first, I would acknowledge Daryl's reality. That it is absolutely true that there are barriers that he's experiencing, which are hard and angering. And I get all of the emotions he must feel about that. This is real. But the choice he gets to make is, should he push against something that he cannot control, or does he focus on what he controls? Because if he focuses on what he controls, he can navigate anything. Because he gets to define who he is. Nobody else. No one takes that from you. You own you.
All right. So you're going to score well on your three metrics that you talked about earlier.
There's a couple hours left of the day, though.
Okay.
So. More to do.
Bruce, you have to top your daughter. You own you is probably the most succinct, powerful response we've got in terms of advice to Daryl. But Bruce, what would you say to the 16-year-old man, the young man?
First of all, Sarah will remember I've said to her that she's really Sarah Inc. And that even though she has different jobs and different relationships, she needs to invest in Sarah Inc. and think about the products and services that Sarah Inc. is going to provide to humanity. Wow. And so constantly being invested in herself. And I would say to Daryl, I'd say, and I do say to young people, I say, why don't we have the 70-year-old Daryl come back and talk to you? And what is he going to say? Is he going to thank you for the decisions you made and the wonderful life you allowed him to live? Or is he going to be disappointed by the things you did and wonder how things got so screwed up, right? Want to smack you around the face. Because I think that, first of all, it's extremely important to have a dream. You have to have some idea of where you want to go and what you want to be. And I think I tell people you should really work on thinking about that and getting the tightest weave possible so you can smell that dream, you can feel it, you can articulate it. And then you need to think about, as you live your life, what are you doing to make that a reality? I mean, you have to participate in your dreams. can't just have them. You have to make them happen, right? And I've said to many young people, they say two things. Says one, if you don't change the direction you're going, you're likely to end up where you're headed, and you might not like it when you get there, right? Right. So you need to think very hard about that, about what you're doing and each decision that you make, because they have consequences. I had 10 very close friends when I was growing up, and they're all dead. All but one was dead by the time they were 30 years old. And in many cases, it's because of the decisions that they made. They put themselves in situations, and it didn't work out well for them. We used to sit around when we played table tennis. We all used to all play together, and we'd stand, and only two people could play at a time. The rest of us would stand around the corner of the thing and talk about what we wanted to do with our lives. What were our dreams, right? And they're all gone. And yet I got to live and experience this wonderful life, right? So, but I think it's very important to think about that, the direction you're going and who you want to be. And it's not a job. It's really what kind of person do you want to be?
Mm-hmm.
How do you want to live your life? How do you want to spend your time, right? And then working really hard to make that happen. Now, Sarah's right. I mean, we all live in a social, political economy. The UK one was different than the one here, right? And so you live in that economy. And so if you want to be successful, then you need to think about how you can manipulate that economy to help you achieve your dreams. And that's my definition of intelligence, incidentally, is how effectively do you manipulate the economy to get what you want, right?
Sometimes I give people this analogy. I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, Dad. That it's like there's a boulder in the middle of a river.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just get like really mad at the boulder and like spend all this time kicking the boulder and trying to push it. I have news for you. It's not going to move. Or you can acknowledge the boulder's existence and navigate around it. I say to people, don't get angry, get smart.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And if you don't know where you want to go, any road will take you there.
Oh my God.
It's brilliant.
I like that.
Wow. Well, Bruce Bond, Sarah Bond, thank you for an amazing, amazing discussion. We have so much to learn from both of you, from your relationship, from what it means to be a great dad, what it means to be a great mom, a great leader. Both of you are pioneers and icons, and thank you for sharing your story with us and our audience.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for being interested in us. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
That's very kind of you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just two brief comments. One, you've both humbled me and inspired me at the same time, and that doesn't happen very often. And Sarah, I have to tell you, I'm going to go upstairs right after this. At the moment, before I came into this podcast, I was a little bit upset with my two teenage daughters for various things, and I've let all that go, and I'm going to just go up and celebrate them and talk to them. And that's coming from you. And
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Well, our audience, thank you for listening, and thank you for joining us for the latest episode of The Invisible Men. If you'd like to see any other episodes, you can go to www.invisible.men. And with that, Bruce, Sarah, thank you. You make you. And thanks for joining us on The Invisible Men.